father of all commandos, appeal, military leader, or strategist, or just a man capable of transforming his own name, his own image. Even that scar, which for a long time was his banner, into a symbol, something that goes far beyond the actual facts of history. But it enters into a legend, a dark legend, a legend that lasted for decades and is still dotted with some question marks today. So when we talk about OTTO SKORZENY, who are we talking about? Are we talking about the man who freed Mussolini, or about the man who, in the famous Operation Oak, that is, the liberation of Mussolini from prison, at Campo Imperatore, he slipped in and seized the opportunity. A man who had brilliant insights, or who was simply in the right place at the right time. A man who made a big change in the way of conducting war in an unorthodox, unconventional way. So, a forerunner of his time, or just a character who borrowed an already tried idea from others? It's difficult to make a historical assessment of the person and personality of OTTO SKORZENY. There are too many shadows, too many doubts, too many situations that are still difficult to understand even today. What is certain about Skorzeny's biography is that he joined the Nazi Party when he was still a student in 1930. At the time, Skorzeny was 22 years old and already had on his face, on his left cheek, the distinctive mark that was then the symbol of certain German student fraternities. There's a scar. Moreover, at that time, in several universities in Germany and elsewhere, the Mensur was practiced, which was the custom of dueling with sabers, sometimes blindfolded in such a way as to inflict visible wounds on the opponents. Wounds that would later become a sort of symbol, a badge to show off. Not a horrible disfigurement, but something that certified the status of a former student of a particular university. Nowadays, we see it as an aberration, but at the time, it was something different. What is certain is that Skorzeny was never an ordinary man, starting with one of his ideas, one of his ambitions, to become a pilot, a fighter pilot within the Luftwaffe in 1939, OTTO SKORZENY, who was 31 years old at the time. But there's a problem. He's too tall, definitely out of size. We're talking about a man who's almost 2 meters tall and weighs over 100 kilos. Impossible to fit in any cockpit of the fighter planes of that time. Is that the end? No. Why? OTTO SKORZENY still finds a way to join the armed forces of the Third Reich. He doesn't join the Luftwaffe, and he can't join the Navy either, where the physical requirements are even stricter. He doesn't join the Army, he joins the Waffen-SS, or rather the embryonic core of the Waffen-SS, the Praetorian Guard, which little by little begins to become more and more structured, with a well-defined military branch. He is assigned to one of the first units of the Waffen-SS, the Leibstandarte, which was the regiment responsible for protecting Hitler. And in a short time, it becomes an armored division. Then, from the Leibstandarte, he moves to the first real armored division of the Waffen-SS, the Das Reich, a division that will be stained by war crimes in France, each one worse than the last. But after fighting in the ranks of the Waffen-SS in the Netherlands, in France, and then also during Operation Barbarossa in Ukraine, OTTO SKORZENY returns to his homeland, because he moves from the combat branch to the SS Secret Service, a secret service that is run by an old acquaintance of this channel. Walter Schellenberg, the man behind the Van Loo heist. We discussed him in a dedicated video available here. The 6th office of the SIG of the RSH, the Reich Main Security Office, is structured under the leadership of Walter Schellenberg as a true secret service of the SS. But it's not just an intelligence service. It's a service that carries out espionage and also sabotage activities. The Loo heist is just the first in a long series of field operations. operations in which OTTO SKORZENY begins to develop a certain talent, both in organizing and in leading them. Skorzeny has a good mind, he's a skilled planner, and he's making his way up. In the summer of 1943, he reaches the rank of Hauptsturmführer, that is, SS captain, and with that rank he is sent to Italy. Summer 1943 is a special time for Italy. On July 25th, Benito Mussolini is removed from power. The Grand Council of Fascism approves Dino Grandi's order of the day and causes the fall of the regime. Shortly after, Mussolini is arrested at Villa Torlonia by order of the king. A new government cabinet, led by Marshal Pietro Badoglio, is established in his place. From that moment, Italy begins to plan its exit from the conflict, playing a dangerous game of chess with two opponents and negotiators. On one side are the Allies, on the other Hitler, who rejects Italy's policy shift, and Mussolini's fall, still seeing him as an old friend. Well, OTTO SKORZENY is among the officers sent to Italy to look for Mussolini's prison. With him is the commanding general of the paratroopers, General Kurt Student, who, interestingly, shares something in common with Skorzeny. He is also a big, burly man, and in fact, he has never actually parachuted. However, he created the paratrooper force, a force that was very valuable for the Wehrmacht in the Netherlands and in Norway. Whereas the invasion of Crete was a complete fiasco. Yes, it succeeded, but too many lives were lost. From that moment on, paratroopers were no longer considered a top-level tactical weapon. They were almost downgraded to low-level infantry. In fact, during the same period after Crete, so after the summer of 1941, the paratrooper troops were used as garrisons, or they were sent to Africa. This is about the Ramche Brigade, which fought as dismounted infantry in the Battle of El Alamein. This time, however, the paratroopers are needed because they are being prepared for what is supposed to be a raid, no longer a large-scale operation, no longer the drop of entire divisions onto well-defended targets with a predictable massacre. No, sir. The task is to locate the prison, drop the paratroopers, storm the prison, and free Mussolini. But first we need to locate the prison. It's a difficult task because Mussolini is moved several times before his final location is determined. Campo Imperatore on Gran Sasso, which is chosen because it's considered a very hard place to access and therefore easy to defend. Of course, paratroopers can get there without any problems. It will be harder to storm the Campo Imperatore hotel refuge, where Mussolini is being held under close watch by carabinieri and soldiers, and then take him away. Because Mussolini doesn't have the build of a digger and can't handle a long trek through the Apennines. So what should we do? According to some historians, it was Skorzeny who came up with the winning ideas. According to others, that wasn't actually the case. And this is where the dark legend of OTTO SKORZENY begins. Because when the prison is located, when does the deployment of entire divisions take place? When does the launch of entire divisions happen? When are entire divisions deployed? When does the deployment of divisions occur? When does the launch of entire divisions take place? When does the deployment of divisions begin? When does the deployment of entire divisions happen? When does it happen with entire divisions? When do entire divisions get deployed? He simply copied the idea from one of his subordinates, Karl Radl, who a few years later would publish a book in which he would take credit for bringing Fernando Soletti and thus for having freed Mussolini. Because the figure of Soletti is important, because by showing Soletti clearly in front of the Nazi troops, well, the desired result is achieved. The carabinieri and soldiers lay down their arms. It is Mussolini himself who understands the situation. He goes to the window when he hears the commotion and clearly says, "Put down your weapons. Don't shoot." Don't you see there's an Italian officer, a general? Don't you recognize him? It's Soletti, which means everything is fine, right? The carabinieri and soldiers obey him. They are stunned. They don't know what to think. On the other hand, in the great escape that followed September 8th, they too were left quite bewildered with few orders available and a chain of fighters. It is said that no one really thought about how to get Mussolini out of there, or even whether to take him away. Maybe transfer him to the south to Brindisi, where the king and the government have taken refuge. The fact is that Operation Oak is a success, but OTTO SKORZENY is not satisfied with having freed Mussolini. He wants to be the man who presents the freed Mussolini to Hitler. In fact, Mussolini insists in a rather threatening manner on getting on board. On the Fiesler Storch, a small two-seater reconnaissance plane. Together with the pilot, Mussolini, let me repeat, it's a light two-seater plane. You can't fit 3 people. Especially since Mussolini is already quite large and Skorzeny is even taller and bigger. And yet Skorzeny, even resorting to some threats against the pilot, manages to get on board. The Storch has a bit of trouble taking off from the ground, but it manages, it gets airborne, reaches Prateca di Mare, and from there it is embarked. Mussolini, together with Skorzeny, heads towards Germany. It is Skorzeny himself who presents the freed Mussolini to Hitler. From that moment on, Skorzeny's career is unstoppable. He is immediately promoted to Sturmbannführer, that is major, and decorated with the Knight's Cross. And he is given a special unit, all his own, a unit we could call a Commando unit, that is, of raiders. A unit that goes into action a few months later, in April of 44, with an attempt that almost succeeds, called Operation Rozesp, an incredible operation to capture Josip Broz Tito, the leader of the communist resistance in Yugoslavia. Skorzeny plans an attack from above carried out by a battalion of Waffen-SS paratroopers directly on Tito's headquarters. Well, Operation Rosprung does not end successfully, because Tito manages to escape capture at the last moment. But this also happened. This increases the aura of OTTO SKORZENY within the Nazi hierarchy. He becomes, if not untouchable, at least a man for theoretically impossible missions. But why does Hitler like that tall, burly officer with the scar on his face? I like him because he's unscrupulous. And he's so unscrupulous that he's in the front row after the assassination attempt, Operation Valkyria, July 20, 1944, to suppress resistance fighters. I like him even more because he takes increasingly bold initiatives. In October 1944, OTTO SKORZENY decided to take the son of Admiral Miklos Horthy, the regent of Hungary, hostage. He was the man who had ruled Hungary with an iron fist for over 20 years. Taking advantage of a vacancy, not a vacation in the sense of a holiday, but the absence of a ruler. Hungary had emerged independent from the Great War, nominally as a monarchy, but without the possibility of installing or appointing any Habsburgs, because by peace treaties, Hungary could not put the former emperor or one of his descendants on the throne. And so Admiral Horthy, hero of the Great War, had taken control of the country and turned it into the first real fascist dictatorship in Europe, even before Italy. However, by early autumn of 44, Horthy had realized that Skorzeny, with a coup, one of his many coups, arrives in Budapest, takes Horthy's son hostage, and brings him to Germany. And from that moment on, he blackmails the admiral, who is forced to give up power and step down. All of this was to prevent Hungary from breaking away from the Axis. This success also earns OTTO SKORZENY another promotion. He reaches the rank of Obersturmbannführer, lieutenant colonel, and with that rank he pulls off his last big coup. However, this too is only a partial success. In the winter of 1944, the last, or rather what is considered the last gasp of the Nazi armed forces, takes place. The last one, actually, will be Operation Sunflower in Hungary, the desperate attempt to retake the oil wells near Lake Balaton. It won't work, but first. In the winter of 1944, there's Operation Weg am Rhein, known as the Ardennes Offensive, an attempt by the armored reserves to break through the Allied lines in the Ardennes. to cut off the supply lines, seize the fuel depots, and force the Allies to retreat from Belgium back to France. A way to demonstrate that German power, though no longer intact, was still formidable. It was also an attempt to induce the Allies into some sort of separate peace, or even a strange alliance to fight communism, Stalin, the Soviet Union pressing from the east. The Ardennes offensive goes through a first phase that is very, very violent, in which the German armored columns, led by another old fox of the Waffen-SS, Joachim Peiper, actually break through. They reach as far as Bastogne, but along with the operation on the field, there is something more hidden. Another commando operation, where OTTO SKORZENY is on the front line. In fact, Skorzeny has set up his own special unit, the Panzer Brigade 150, and in Operation Greif, he filled this Panzer Brigade. They are German soldiers in American uniforms who speak excellent English, sometimes even with East Coast American slang. These commandos are used to create chaos behind Allied lines. They give false information about advancing Germans, remove road signs, and divert American supply and reinforcement columns. For a long time, it's chaos, but it's something that helps the Germans slow down the response. The Americans will take a while to uncover it. Skorzeny's commandos will have to resort to really absurd questions. Imagine Americans interrogating other soldiers in American uniforms, not about operational plans or battle strategies or insignias. No, they ask about baseball games, about the delis on different streets in New York, or about the weather in Paris. All information that obviously Skorzeny's commandos couldn't possibly know. They are sequentially exposed, captured, and executed by firing squad, because clearly the Code of War does not allow those who fight in another uniform to invoke the Geneva Convention on Prisoners of War. And so it comes to an end, not of this story, but of the direct war experience of OTTO SKORZENY, who is captured at the beginning of May 1945 when Germany collapses. OTTO SKORZENY, like many others, goes on trial because it's clear that his activities, the liberation of Mussolini, the attempted assassination of Tito, the operation in Hungary, and even more so the Ardennes, did not go unnoticed. In fact, his name is now known even among the Allies. Everyone predicts the gallows for OTTO SKORZENY, because after all, it was he who decided to disguise German soldiers as Americans and send them beyond the lines in cooperation with commandos. An operation, something forbidden, but actually no. OTTO SKORZENY gets away with it, as they would say in slang. OTTO SKORZENY doesn't end up on the scaffold. He's acquitted. In his defense, another character we've already met in our stories comes forward, and you can find his story on this channel. Royal Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Frederick E. Thomas, the White Rabbit, the man who survived the tortures of the Lyon executioner Klaus Barbie and the torturers of the Gestapo on Avenue Foch in Paris. And Thomas had also been a British commando. And at the trial for defeat, Skorzeny testifies in his favor, stating that the British in Africa had also used fake German uniforms to infiltrate behind enemy lines. For example, at Tobruk in September 1942. So if the Allies had done it and nothing happened to the person who came up with the plan, why prosecute a former enemy who had used the same method? And maybe he was actually inspired by what the Allies had done for that operation? Well, that's another question mark. Did Skorzeny create Operation Greif himself, or did he get the idea from someone else? Specifically from the late Lieutenant Colonel Hazelden of the British Commandos of the Long Range Desert Group. Good question. We can't ask Hazelden, he's dead, Tobruk, and Skorzeny himself never clarified exactly who inspired him. The fact is that Skorzeny, as he said, Spain, and even though for a while he was held in a military prison in Austria, after a while, thanks to the good offices of Odessa, and if you want to know more about Odessa, we have a video on this channel, he manages to escape to Spain, one of the many havens for fleeing Nazis, Spain, Portugal, after a while also Egypt with Nasser, and of course South America. From that moment on, the dark legend of OTTO SKORZENY grows richer with details, some proven, others whispered, but never fully confirmed. He is spoken of as an inspiration for the Gehlen networks, the German Gladio, that is, the networks set up by former General Reinhard Gehlen to organize a possible resistance in case of a breakthrough by the Eastern Bloc. Not only that, Skorzeny is mentioned as a consultant to the Black Prince, Junio Valerio Borghese, for the Borghese coup. And we've already talked about this too. But that's not enough. The name Skorzeny comes back into the spotlight. In the mid-1960s, when the first facts about Operation Damocles emerged, another topic we've already discussed, the Al-Wain missiles, the missiles that Nasser had former Nazi scientists build to strike Israel. The name OTTO SKORZENY comes up among those responsible for the kidnapping of Heinz Krug, a former SS sergeant who became a recruiter of scientists in Munich and who vanished without a trace after a dinner, precisely with Skorzeny, or at least that's what they say, and with Dr. Heinz Kleinbach. According to some journalists, Skorzeny was allegedly hired by the Israelis. Incredible, a former Nazi being hired by the Mossad to make Heinz Krug vanish, who was allegedly killed and dumped in a lake, though there's no evidence. Only a few newspaper articles accused Skorzeny of being in Munich when Krug disappeared. Believe him or not, we just can't know anymore. Because, after all, OTTO SKORZENY died of cancer in Madrid, Spain, on July 5th, 1975, leaving behind mysteries and rumors. A long dark legend, perhaps fueled by himself, even through his memoirs, perhaps exaggerated by some biographers, by some journalists who saw in him a sort of black prince of the Commandos, or perhaps simply an exaggerated figure within history, as sometimes happens. What remains for us of OTTO SKORZENY, beyond his distinctive scar, the photos that portray him at Campo Imperatore, behind Mussolini, or in other images in uniform. It's the image of a man unlike the others, a man who thought he would be an aviator but never actually flew, except for struggling to lift himself off the ground, not as a pilot, but as a passenger on that Storch at Campo Imperatore. The man who wanted to dare among the clouds, but who dared much more on the ground, among men, creating ridiculous plans, sometimes imaginative and sometimes possibly copied. But who managed to create a legend, the legend of the Nazi Commando, the legend of OTTO SKORZENY? We thank you for watching our video carefully. Let us remind you